Welcome, everybody, to Ownership Podcast. Today, I am joined by Arad, founder of Lightcone, and this is Season 1, Episode 8 of the podcast. And I'll let you, Arad, introduce yourself. I'm very excited for today's episode for multiple reasons, but I'll let you introduce yourself, man.
Cool. Thanks for having me. Hi. I don't like to do introductions, to be honest with you. Let's keep it vague. But as for history, I would say. But yeah, I'm the co-founder of Lightcone. I have been very much involved in MetaDAO for the past more than 2 years now? Yeah, it's more than 2 years. So I created proposals, traded proposals, bothered profit and colon way too much, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I would say futarchy and now Lightcone and impact markets have been together my obsession over the past 2 years. So big fan of the pod and happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. As you know, I'm also a big fan of MetaDAO. I think I've gotten more involved in the past 1 year. And so you've been here, you're more of an OG than I am, but I do wonder, how did you get started, or where did this obsession with MetaDAO come from? Is it just an obsession with markets? Especially because the thing that you're building, which we'll get to very soon, Lightcone it's sort of very similar to MetaDAO and futarchy. So was it always something that you've been obsessed about? Have markets always been something that you found interesting? What exactly is the thing that you've kind of nerd snipe you?
Yeah, for me, it's twofold. One, yes, I've always been a markets guy. Kind of, aren't we all, if you're in crypto. The main thing for me, I guess if I were to string a thread throughout my histories, I've been involved in internet native governance in one form or another for basically all of my life, like since I was 11, maybe even earlier in browser strategy games where you run clans, and then a little later through running forums in communities, again, since a young teenager and a kid, and then throughout crypto, both in kind of just straight up old school GitHub open source repos, and then in these kind of community governed proof of work coins through actual Ethereum-based DAOs that rely on snapshot. So just been involved in every type of pseudonymous emergent governance structure out there pretty much, and have very often enjoyed it, but have also felt the challenges there and why it sucks, which at this point, you don't really have to convince people that the latest version of it is flawed. But in general, it's just the form is not perfect. And the form is not perfect, especially when you have the limitations of the internet and pseudonymity and the lack of the rule of law and judicial system and contract law. So yeah, I would say that's what made futarchy immediately click for me, other than just being a very cool market primitive. And just as a markets guy, I think we all tend to think that the market has this innate wisdom in it that can just be unleashed, and it often trumps the kind of bureaucratic processes. So obviously there's that, but yeah, certainly from personal experiences as well.
Do you think there's any connection, or do you find it exciting that MetaDAO has been gaining a lot of popularity, even with its disadvantages and cons, I do think people are slowly starting to realize that that MetaDAO is a very good way to raise money through the internet, and decision markets are actually a very powerful primitive. And not only that, so we have that on the fundraising side and the governance side, but on a more of a trading side and a retail side, we're also trying, well, sort of seeing more of an interest for regular people in prediction markets, which is it has a lot to do with futarchy, especially the origins, because they both come from Robin Hanson. But do you see any connection between futarchy's success and the success of prediction markets?
Yeah,
Do
100%.
you think that these things are positive for humanity? I think that's kind of maybe a better question of whether these things are positive and what we can gain from them, right? I mean, what are the things that these things allow us to do that were not possible before?
Yeah, so, I mean, first thing I'll say is that if you go back to Polymarket original tweets, kind of in the first few months, they didn't even call themselves prediction markets. They just called themselves information markets. Like, you go to their first tweet, prediction is not a word in there. They call themselves information markets platform. And, you know, I call Lightcone and impact markets an information market platform. I think futarchy and MetaDAO are an information market platform. We all use this idea that markets, given the right incentives, markets can do a much better job, certainly more consistently, than individuals in kind of assessing questions, really any questions. So there's certainly a lot in common here. And, you know, the moment Polymarket blew up last year, I believe it was last year, right? Yeah. The moment Polymarket blew up, I think we all felt, it was
during the elections,
we all felt that the attention towards futarchy is going to come pretty shortly after. Now, I do want to give massive credit to Profit and Colin for taking the idea of decision markets in futarchy and using that as a kind of a raising capital / ownership angle, which I think was not obvious in the first year of MetaDAO. And I think most people will not have realized that that's the wedge where you can start bringing decision markets into mainstream. It was kind of obvious that the world is too early for that, or that it's going to be a very slow journey to bring about the futarchy TM. But they did a really good job in kind of using that to create a new, much more, you know, go-to-market ready system that is differentiated. Does that answer? Did I answer the question? Kind of.
I think so, yeah. And I think you brought up something very interesting, which is information and how these markets help surface information. In one of your articles, where you criticize futarchy, or I think it's called "When Futarchy Fails." Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you basically in that article, for anybody who's listening, you basically criticize some of the MetaDAO proposals because they basically didn't. The proposals themselves didn't contain all the informations for markets to properly price those decisions. Is that correct? Am I framing that correctly?
Yeah, for sure. I did have some disagreements in how, for a long time, in how decision markets have been done on MetaDAO, not because they're fundamentally broken, but because you can't just be half-assed in your implementation. And I've kind of beaten the drum on two things for, again, more than 2 years now. One is, I'll mention that quickly, is what I call omnibus proposals. That idea of including 10 different things in one proposal and then letting the market decide whether that's plus EV, and thus taking away its right to judge each of them individually, right? So you can include 10 things, altogether they're plus EV for the company, but 2 of them are minus EV, but you still get it through because it's an omnibus proposal, right? It's a very known idea in governance generally, in legislation. That happens all the time. I don't like that. I think MetaDAO should have some kind of constitution, at least in its first years, that because like Profit and Golan have keys to reject proposals. I think they should have a few key principles on which they would reject proposals. One of them is a omnibus proposal. But what you were referring to and what I was writing about in the When Futarchy Fails piece is the other condition where I think decision markets don't work quite well, which is just lack of information. It's just a very obvious idea that I've had to oddly fight for, and that is you have to expose information if you want the market to assess the value of something, right? You can't have a proposal that exposes 30% of the information and 70% of it remains private in the hands of the proposers, right? That gives them an advantage where they can kind of extract value from other people. So other people are essentially buying a mispriced asset. They have insider information. But the most important reason is the market can't assess the real EV, or like it can't do a best attempt at assessing the EV of the proposal. So that there have been many cases in the history of MetaDAO so far where either the proposal started with not enough information and I and a few others had to pretty aggressively request more information, or it just ended up failing or passing without enough information. So yeah, it's not that complicated. It's pretty straightforward. There's not much to talk about here, but yeah, I hope in time they take that more seriously. It's kind of like how in Polymarket there has been dozens and dozens, and I wrote a post about it some time ago listing at least a dozen, but there have been probably hundreds of contentious markets that were not defined correctly, and that have caused massive user stress, massive user loss, confusion, loss of reputation, etc. But this is all downstream of not clearly defining the edge cases and not clearly defining the kind of the rules of the market. But with MetaDAO, with decision markets, we're kind of offhanding it. There doesn't seem to be a robust system or attempt to really standardize, what does a proper proposal look like? And I think that's a point of improvement.
Okay, just talking about information and how we can surface it, and how decision markets use it and prediction markets use it. I think it's very interesting what you are doing with Lightcone and what multiverse markets are, or multiverse protocols, multiverse finance. I'm not sure exactly how we would frame it. So I just want to give you the space to kind of explain what exactly Lightcone is and how it improves on something like Polymarket, or how it sort of maybe competes or makes it whole, or how does it give us the whole picture when it comes to the future. So yeah, you just go ahead and explain it to the audience, because I don't think everybody knows.
Yeah, for sure. I would say two things. What I call impact markets. First of all, greatly inspired by two things. One, decision markets. So many thanks to MetaDAO for that. And the two is the Dave White piece called Multiverse Finance, which is why you said the word multiverse. I don't actually use these words anymore. I only use them very shortly. I will also say that piece doesn't really illustrate the product idea of Lightcone. I actually talked to Dave White some months after that and told him the idea of Lightcone, and he found it new. So his piece is awesome, and it certainly dropped the penny for me, but I wouldn't say the product is directly correlates to that piece. But anyway, I stopped calling it multiverse. I call it impact markets. For the first 2 months or so, before I came up with the name impact markets, it was actually much, much harder to explain to people the idea and get them to care about it. It's kind of this, multiverse trading I called it also conditional asset trading, which is a more accurate term, but people aren't able to slide that puzzle piece into a convenient place in the brain, right? They don't know where to slide it in, what memory hole. And once I started calling it impact markets, people start going, well, okay, impact markets, that sounds kind of familiar, and that sounds pretty similar to prediction markets. So it's probably an iteration of prediction markets, right? And this is where I want them to be. But yeah, what Lightcone is essentially, if I come at it from the angle of MetaDAO and futarchy, it is essentially implicit decision markets or permissionless decision markets. What do I mean? Well, if you unpack decision markets, they essentially take an asset and they split that asset into two outcomes, right? One alternative version of the asset that assumes outcome A happens, and one alternative version of the asset that assumes outcome B happens. You let people trade both of those versions for, let's say, a week. And then you are able to buy the prices that the market is willing to pay for them. You're able to assert, okay, well, if outcome A happens, then this is what the company is worth, what the token is worth. And if outcome B happens, this is what the token is worth, right? But with decision markets, there's a big constraint. Because we are explicitly committing to making a decision based on the decision market, that means that A, the question at hand has to be something we entirely control. So raising capital, firing profit, God no. But things in our control. And then also the asset that is correlated to the company that we control, right? So if we wanted to do a fire Elon Musk market, we have to get, if MetaDAO wanted to do that, they would have to get the approval of Tesla. So what this essentially creates is it's a very small subset of the available questions in the world, right? It can only be questions we control. And B, it is only a very small subset of the assets. Again, there's only been decision markets so far for tokens that have explicitly agreed to make a decision for via decision markets. So it's essentially almost a B2B business. It's really hard to scale. So what Lightcone is based on is the realization that you can take the exact same mechanism where you split an asset into two different outcomes, universes, whatever you want to call it, two different versions. But instead of a governance question, you take any event, and instead of a governance token or a company token, you can take any asset in the world, right? So you can do stuff like, well, we really care about and we're really interested in what happens to oil if the war in Iran restarts, what happens to Bitcoin if the Republicans sweep the House or if the Democrats sweep the House, what happens to the market if what happens to Sol if the Clarity, or maybe even to Circle if the Clarity bill passes or if it doesn't pass, right? All these questions, and no longer we have to get approval for these companies or these assets, or we don't have to control the event. It just becomes an information primitive, and it becomes a speculative primitive. So people can trade based on what they think oil is worth if the war in Iran restarts. And it's a new way of speculating. It's based on their impact expectation, and no decision is based on it, not explicitly at least. The information that surfaces, just like from Polymarket, it may very well end up in the hands of the White House and may very well end up influencing their decision, but it doesn't have to, right? So now it's a much, I would say, bigger TAM as a trading product, at least, as the volume, in terms of the volume that you can run through it, I would argue is a much bigger TAM. And yeah, that's that in a nutshell.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that is such an interesting idea of basically making decision markets basically removing the decision from decision markets and making it into impact markets is a very interesting thing. However, some questions do come into mind. When the first of which is, how do you settle these trades? Like, is it similar to prediction markets where upon the event happening or not, you settle the trades? Or could you give me some insight into how that happens?
Yeah, it's very hard for people to imagine, and I don't blame them. I think if you were to try to explain to someone how a decision market works in practice and how do you trade decision markets before MetaDAO was actually live, it would have been extremely difficult. Same thing here. We kind of have to release the app for it to be way clearer than it is right now. But essentially, you have these two versions of an asset. Each version trades at a different price, right? So maybe you have spot oil trading at $90, and then we create a new version of oil that assumes the war is like conditioned on the war in Iran restarting, and that is trading right now at 110. And there's a peer-to-peer order book. People can buy and sell that asset at $110. And essentially, if whatever trade they make there, if they buy oil in that outcome, or if they sell oil in that outcome, if the outcome doesn't end up happening, so if the war in Iran doesn't happen, they get their capital back 1-to-1. So it's like they never did anything. It's almost like you can think about it, I'm trading in a hypothetical universe. And if that universe goes from hypothetical into reality, then every trade I made comes into fruition at the price that I bought it at, right? So maybe I locked in $110 oil, and then 3 months from now, the war happens. I don't care what prices oil is trading at right now. I only care that the trade that I did already happened at $110. And then, so essentially, if there's two universes, one you can say is void, and one of them merges into reality. You can think about it like that.
And who decides whether the event has happened? I mean, one of the biggest criticisms, I think, of Polymarket is their resolution mechanism with UMA. So I'm wondering how you guys will.
I am glad you bring that
that
up. Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because I will contest and say there's nothing to solve, or there is something to solve, but it's different than what most people think. So I wrote a piece last summer called "Prediction Markets: The Oracle Problem is Not the Problem." It's, if you go to my X profile, it's under my articles, the first one. And my contention essentially is that, well, UMA is not ideal. I do say in that piece, and I do believe that they are better off doing in-house resolution, which I think they will at some point. You essentially want someone with a long-term stake in the success of the platform itself to be the one that is making the decisions. Then it's much more expensive to bribe or influence them to short-term plus EV kind of resolutions as opposed to long-term plus EV. But anyway, so I believe in-house resolution is by far the best way to go about it right now, barring some very sophisticated system that no one has created yet. But I also say the problem with Polymarket is not really the UMA. I think there's a lot of false blame there. There's some markets where UMA is to blame, but most of the controversy in Polymarket stems from inaccurate definitions or incomplete definitions, where, and I go about it in the piece, I think we're very attached to the word oracles in crypto, but when we think about oracles, usually we think about them in the sense of price. And the beautiful thing about price oracles is that we all know what the truth is for price, right? So an oracle essentially reports truth from the off-chain to an on-chain environment, and we slash them, we take away their money if we deem them to be malicious or have downtime. But in the case of price oracles, it's very easy to tell whether a price oracle was malicious, because it's very easy to define what data he is supposed to report on. There are very simple ways to define canonical price. But the problem with prediction markets and impact markets is that each event has its own definition, essentially. So the way a presidential winner is defined is very different than the way the war in Iran is defined. It's very different from the way the war, the Clarity Bill is defined, or the Fed decisions are defined, et cetera, et cetera. And each of them has nuances in how you define it. And so at that point, and we see this with Polymarket, most of the confusions and problems stem from an incomplete definition of what should be the truth. And oracles are entirely useless. You can have the most decentralized, trustless, reliable oracle in the world, but if it doesn't know what it should report, or if we don't know what that oracle should be reporting because the truth is not obvious, because the definition was not clearly defined, then the oracle is not worth anything. And so most of the time, the problems with prediction markets and impact markets is in how you actually define that outcome, right? So very simple example, let's say there is a 2028 presidential election and we define the market as Republicans or Democrats, and then an independent ends up winning, right? That an oracle, doesn't matter how good the oracle is, the oracle wouldn't be able to resolve that. The problem is that there is no solution, there is no truth, because the market definition did not account for that edge case. So yeah, I would just say, I wrote a whole piece about it. I probably shouldn't have spent 3 minutes on that, but I would say the oracle is not the problem, and the TLDR, or it's not the main challenge, and the TLDR is that we're going to do in-house resolution for the foreseeable future.
I just wanted to ask you about one of the things you said, because I thought it was very interesting, what you said there. Do you think it's realistic to expect the definition to be perfect for every prediction market? It's kind of like expecting a KPI to be perfect. I don't know if we can make a perfect definition that kind of encompasses every single outcome.
Yeah.
The best we can do is, have something that's good enough, right?
Depends how you define failure, right? In the example I just brought, failure is literally we didn't cover the whole universe, essentially. So that is indeed solvable. If we do a yes or no market, as in we define the market as Republican yes or Republican no, then by definition we cover everything, and there's nothing that isn't covered. But you can say it's still flawed because then Democrat option is kind of bundled in with an independent option, which we don't really want it to be bundled in, and that can add a bit of noise, or a lot of noise, depends. So, but I fully agree. Like, there is no perfection really, just like there is no perfect legal contract. But you can try to do as best as you can. And I think in crypto, we're very scared of that idea that, something is not fully solvable, deterministic, hands-off, can operate forever. But I believe that defining events is always going to be a partially human process, at least. Yeah, or a non-deterministic process, maybe taken over by LLMs.
Do you see impact markets / Lightcone competing with prediction markets, or do you more so see it as a complementary thing? Like for me, I can actually imagine traders very accurately price the future using the combination of the two things. Yeah, so I just want to know your opinion about that.
Yeah, I believe it's all speculation right now because the product doesn't exist, and we may all be humbled. But I believe it's not. It's certainly adjacent and complementary in the sense that the market gives us great answers for probabilities right now, but gives us no answers for impact. And once we have both answers, market-based answers for probability and impact, we essentially have this full picture of the world of projecting financial assets and kind of projecting the future. I will say I don't think that there is going to be a large overlap in the users themselves. I believe there's going to be a large overlap in the users that consume the information. I don't think the overlap is going to be large with the traders themselves. Think about it like that. Take, for example, whether the clarity bill passes. To bet on whether, well, let's first lay out the foundation that to take a trade anywhere, doesn't matter where, which asset, which platform, you kind of have to believe you know better than the market. Even if you're completely wrong and self-delusional, like most people are not going to take a trade unless they feel like they know better. And knowing whether the clarity bill is going to pass or not requires a lot of legal, legislative knowledge. Is like how many votes, what's the process, what's the pipeline, what's the back and forth, to really feel like you get a grasp of how this thing works and what it needs to go through to be accepted, is quite a niche knowledge, and it really depends. It really changes based on the event, right? So again, if you're betting on elections, at the end of the day, you're betting on whether some swing state is gonna, and maybe even down to the county, like what is the county gonna swing blue or red? It's very niche knowledge. Whereas I would say asking those same events, but in an impact angle, most likely, or much more likely, if you already trade assets like BTC, Sol, etc., you probably have some opinion on how the clarity bill passing, whether it's going to be bullish or bearish and how much to Sol, and the elections, what kind of is the intensity of the bullishness and bearishness of each outcome happening, right? Because if you already trade these assets, people I think have much easier time deluding themselves that they have alpha in things that have to do directly with the assets that they already trade than with very niche questions that they maybe have never really asked themselves. Anyway, all that to say that I think the impact markets audience is going to be more centered around people who already trade assets. And the prediction markets crowd, I think, will have some overlap, but is perhaps more diverse and more specialized than impact markets. Yeah, I would say most people who trade on spot or perps will, I believe, at some point find interest in impact markets, especially one event, once they find an event that they feel they have alpha on.
I think another question that comes to mind, and this kind of relates to both basically any market at all on Earth, which is insider trading. So I kind of want to get your opinion, first of all, generally about insider trading. I've definitely had the opinion that insider trading is usually not as bad as people put it out to be, and you need some sort of insider information to be trading on the market to accurately price these assets. But obviously, you can make the counter argument that it's not very healthy because then people will stop participating in these markets. So first of all, I just want to get your opinion generally about insider trading, and then second, I would love to know, like, how do you think insider trading affects impact markets and prediction markets?
Yeah, that's a big topic. I'll try to keep it short. I think for decision markets, any private information that can be made public should be made public. And I've said this before, when we first started talking, but I've come around to private info. I don't think I ever was really against private information per se in decision markets. It's essentially plus, like, if your goal is to make the best decision, then you do want people who have insider information to trade based on that, because your goal is to make the best decisions and they help price the asset correctly. Again, only if that is private information that it's not in their place to share, right? So if we're trying to hire a new CEO and I, Arad, know that this new CEO, I know him really well, and I know he's incredible, and I'm willing to bid up, and this is kind of private information, I'm willing to bid up the token higher, great. I did my service, I made decision markets better. But if I, Arad, am making a proposal and I withhold some information intentionally, and then I trade based on that without a good reason, and then I trade based on that, I think that's minus EV. So there's nuance there. So in general, with information markets, I do mind insider trading more so than in decision markets. It's unhealthy just from the fact, and I think you'll probably agree, and that's why you changed your mind. I've been saying it's mostly about building a healthy ecosystem. If you have frequent insider trading, that deters legitimate actors, and the only way you can trade, you can kind of scale markets is when legitimate actors feel completely safe and they're not being taken out for a ride. This is something that has been discovered by American capital markets way back, and we have examples from history of capital markets that were very heavy on insider information. I believe Hong Kong in the 80s was an extreme example, and we just know that they're more dysfunctional. So even though insider trading can cause one prediction market or one impact market trade better and more accurately, I would be concerned if that becomes a pattern, and I think that's long-term bad for the accuracy of them. So that's that. I will say what I'm definitely against is mixed incentives, specifically through decision markets. Since we're in a futarchy podcast, I will emphasize that. I definitely fought some battles on the order book of MetaDAO and in Discord about whether it's moral to trade proposals that have mixed incentives, where you can trade, everyone trades based on the EV for MetaDAO, but one actor has mixed incentive, personal incentive, where if the proposal passes, they themselves benefit in addition to the value gained for MetaDAO, and that can distort the market. I don't think it's a problem when these markets become big. Again, if you're trying to create a mispricing because you have personal incentives, the market generally at scale can have infinite resources to fight against you, and won't really let you misprice it that much. But I digress. I'm generally against insider trading.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm also coming to a very similar conclusion as I see more evidence and I see more arguments come up on both sides. So just back to Lightcone, at what stage are you guys? Like, how can I try it out? If anybody's listening here, how do they participate? Are you guys planning to do a raise, or if you could give some insight into that, that'd be pretty great.
Yeah, for sure. So we are launching super soon, I would say. I don't want to give a date, but it's a matter of weeks away. If you want in, it's going to be a private beta at first, maybe even limited capital, but certainly limited users. And if you want in, just comment on one of my posts, essentially, or even DM me, and I will get you on the list. And yeah, we're launching super soon. I'm really excited to get impact market out there, even if it's going to be a long journey, which I do expect it will be. It's such a new primitive. Explaining to people what it means, how you can trade it. I think it's going to take a while, and you can't really brute force it. You kind of have to let it happen, in my opinion. So I don't expect a ton of volume and a ton of users at first. I don't think it's going to be a 0-to-1 product. I do want to say that. But I think very quickly with a pretty small amount of users and volume, we are already going to be the best source globally for these questions of impact. And my prediction is that within a year, the White House is going to look at impact prices that we expose. So you don't actually need that much volume for that to just be superior to any other information source. But yeah, we're launching very soon on Solana. Stay tuned. Put me on notifications.
Yeah, and why Solana, by the way? Or are you guys going to be exclusive to Solana? Was any other chain on the table? Just curious.
Yeah, look, since 23 or so, whatever chain you're on doesn't really matter. I would say it's mostly thanks to Privy and some thanks to cross-chain protocols. Chain abstraction is just extremely good. There's very little that matters. For me, it was partially principle, or rather a long-term bet where I really hated the EVM. It was designed at a time where we had no idea what we're going to do on programmable public blockchains. Vitalik was at the time thinking we're going to do immutable legal contracts, right? Things have changed. Even though Vitalik has projected a lot of great things forward. I mean, he wrote about futarchy in 2014, if I recall, or 2016. I think it was 2014. But yeah, we had no idea what we're going to do there. And I just didn't want to build a protocol that, I want to last years and years and years into the future on the EVM, which again, I think has not been designed for the reality that we live today. And a couple of months after I made that decision, I mean, Vitalik himself started writing Medium articles about a post-EVM world. So I would say that's somewhat been correct, but we'll see. I think it's the main reason. I would say generally the UX is a bit better. Transaction confirmation, consistency, latency, all that is a bit better on Solana. But yeah, it's the main reason. Oh, yeah, and sorry, I forgot to mention MetaDAO is on Solana, and I think we can build a great foundation of multiverse, like a core user group and like a core maybe composable ecosystem here on Solana of these like really innovative financial products. So it was also a bonus to be a neighbor, you could say, a cybernetic neighbor of MetaDAO.
Oh, I love that framing. Cybernetic neighbor. That sounds so good. I'm gonna be stealing that from now on.
All right, you're welcome to.
Yeah. I think as the last question to kind of close this off. Well, maybe it's two questions in one, but just bear with me here. First of all, what is the thing about Lightcone that excites you the most? Like which part of it? Is it the tech? Is it you being able to trade on these markets, or something else? And second, if you have anything left you want to say to the world, you can just say whatever. And yeah, those are kind of the two closing questions I have for you.
Sweet. Well, the first one is definitely fun. What excites me about Lightcone? Well, that we're in a greenfield territory, right? So we have to essentially invent, MetaDAO did some work for us, of course, conceptually. Robin Hansen did a lot of work for us. Dave White did some work for us and some other people. But the details of the product have to be invented, like, starting from the name, impact markets, to the UI and how you educate people on it and what kind of strategies you can make and how you frame it, how you design the architecture, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's just unlike any product out there. So it's very challenging and very exciting and fun and intellectually stimulating to work on. So that's number one. But I'd say number two, just as important, it's a social technology. It's not just a tech product. It's not just a market product. It can literally change the fabric of society. We can peek into the future for decisions that we make or for hypothetical realities. I don't think we fully understand what the implications of that might be quite yet. They could be quite big, in my opinion. I think we're going to take a lot of flack. How much flack, how Polymarket gets flagged. Polymarket has been banned by many, many countries. I didn't realize that until I was in some random country in Europe the other week and couldn't access Polymarket for a whole week. And I was literally about to DM Shane to fix your shit. And good thing I didn't send that DM, because I found out that it's fucking banned. It's not just you can't trade, the website doesn't even load. You just get a weird error. I think we're gonna get flack from manipulation, kind of accusations. If we spin up an election market and one candidate is clearly better for the market and for people's portfolios and their pensions, that could very well impact the elections, right? And that's something that a lot of politicians will not be happy about, especially on a pseudonymous environment like Solana. But at the end of the day, yeah. So that's kind of a side note where I think it will be very controversial. But on the brighter side, I think it's an incredibly interesting social technology, and I'm super excited to try to figure it out. How do we make it work best? How to make it happen, be a thing. And I'm extremely convinced. I think what excites me most is that I'm extremely convinced that the name Impact Markets is going to be a household name in a couple of years. So the thought of us being the ones to bring that about is just very exciting. Financial outcomes aside. Yeah, and you had a second question as well, which I don't remember.
Yeah. So the second question was, or basically a prompt, kind of, which is if you have anything more to say to finish this off to the audience, let them know about something. You can just do that now, in case there's anything that you think we missed in our conversation.
Wow. I wish, my mind, after talking for 50 minutes about myself, my mind is as empty as it could be. It's not good for your soul to just talk about yourself, I feel like, and what you're doing and your opinions for almost an hour. I do debates and discussions, and everyone who's talked to me on Telegram or Discord groups knows that I can be quite a lovely person in IRL, but quite an asshole online, or very aggressive a bit in debates. So I do love those, and I guess let me segue that into one final comment, is that if you think the product we launch is bad in one way or another, you have criticisms, or you're excited or whatever, I fucking love discussing impact markets with other people. And I think it's extremely exciting, even for you, just the excitement I felt of being one of the first 100 users of decision markets, which I knew were going to be very big one day, and I could be part of history. The same thing I feel about impact markets. So this time I'm on more on the driver's seat as opposed to the observation seat. But I've gotten so much value from kind of being very involved and giving a lot of feedback to Profit and Colin, and discussing it with other people, and actually using decision markets and creating decision markets myself. So much value, both spiritually and practically. And I would say, I would love, if you're listening to this, I encourage you to do that for impact markets. If you, like me, believe that, in 10 years, in 5 years, it's going to be this big thing, and you have the chance to take a really first class seat into it, and tell us what we're doing wrong, actually trade it, suggest markets to us. we're actually going to give credit to people who suggested markets and they end up on the platform. It's literally on the page itself. We will say, we will link your Twitter as this person suggested the market to us, and we will try to acknowledge everyone who has being a kind of in that early circle, and in either way, I think it's going to be extremely interesting, and that's my prompt. Maybe also a bit selfish in the theme of going on a podcast where you talk about yourself. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for coming on today. Thank you for everybody who's listening to this. This was a really enlightening podcast episode. I can't wait to try out Lightcone. I can't wait to look at these impact markets and actually try them out firsthand as somebody who's very futarchy pilled. It's going to be really exciting. So yeah, thank you for everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Arad, for coming on today, and thank you for MetaDAO. Thank you to MetaDAO and Umbra for sponsoring the episode and just sponsoring ownership in general. For all the listeners, I encourage you guys to follow us on all the social medias out there, and to maybe pop into our Telegram every now and then, because there's some pretty cool discussions happening there. So yeah.
Thanks so much for inviting me. That was a very futarded episode.
Yeah, and I'll see you guys next time.